Hello and good evening. Bună seara. Sunt Cristina Stoenescu în conversația astă seară cu Anetta Mona Chisa, pentru că am promovat foarte mult evenimentul online la nivel internațional. Vom continua conversația în limba engleză și mulțumim frumos că sunteți alături de noi. Sau că vă uitați la video mai târziu. Isn't that right, Anetta? Hello?
Hello, hi. Yes, that's absolutely right.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me tonight, talking about our show, Temporal Parts at Anca Poterasu Gallery. It is a show that was made possible through the EA grants. You participated in a call for artistic residencies, and throughout the very cold October, in November, we've worked together for this show.
That's right.
I'm just a bit nervous, but I have to say that I was really happy to have this conversation tonight with you, because I felt that it was really too short, even then, after a month that you spent in Bucharest. And
yeah. I think we started a very nice conversation from the very beginning. I enjoyed it very much, so it's always a pleasure to continue.
So I might skip a few beats, but I'm focusing on, like I told you before, like having and continuing this conversation with you, because I felt like I was very happy to also read through your portfolio, the kind of projects and the kind of collaborative exhibitions that you made throughout. It's one of I think the best known collaborations that you had is with Lucia Takova. And of course, with your participation at the Venice Biennial in 2011, together with Ion Grigorescu and the very acclaimed show performing history. And ever since, the way and the medium that you move through, installations, performance, video work, they create sometimes very contradictory sort of contexts, but always looking anew on things, always shifting and changing perspectives. And this is how I felt that this show, and actually your work for the last 2 years into this new collaborations with inorganic matter, that it links so well also with this idea of just throwing a new perspective on things. And I will just introduce a bit, maybe the topic of the show, Temporal Parts, to then be easier to move together through sort of online guided tours with questions and a few reflections on each of the installations. Before you arrived to Bucharest, I read, and you write so wonderfully. I read your text on Cozy Cosmos Cosmetics, which really kind of introduced the topic for me, also from our conversations together. But what drew my eye especially was this text by Roger Calois with The Writing of Stones. And he introduces this idea of sedimentary rocks that go way back to the geological era before man even walked to the earth. I think this is word by word of how you retell the text. And he describes this process in which life emerges from inorganic matter. And it struck me, I think one of the first questions that I've asked you is, okay, but are we talking about inorganic matter as if it was alive? Is this a sort of post-humanist perspective on things? And I think this would really be nice to start again for the others to follow as well.
Exactly. Like, I think also with this show, I intended to emphasize the kinship between people and inorganic matter and substances, because we kind of separate these two, and we never assign any kind of agency to this inert dead matter. So the skinship has been underlined by presenting something throughout the show that we perceive as inorganic or as dead, as a vibrant act. And this has been always my interest. Like, I looked at materials, and I'm very curious about what they have to say and how they can become a participant and a sort of body in this creative process. To make the case for the skinship, I try to show how materials like gypsum, for example, which is like the main, also the protagonist in our exhibition, our project together, is active and reactive, and it undergoes processes and also participates somehow with together with humans in all kinds of materialhood and thinghood. It's everywhere. It's part of us. It's kind of it's becoming
I remember one fragment that you've told me that calcium, for example, is a very promiscuous element, which I always found it a very funny way of describing.
Yes, exactly. It is indeed, because it's a very reactive substance. And maybe I will just mention that the gypsum or plaster, is calcium sulfate. So calcium is the main component, the main compound in the plaster, and it's you can't find calcium in a free singular form in nature. It's always in collaboration or in composition with something else, whether it's carbon or sulfate or many other substances. It's always it's in a marriage with another substance. So I liked calcium for being such a welcoming and embracing any kind of substance.
And I think it links nicely also with this link between how we view matter around us and then linking directly into the artistic practice of sculpture.
What I like to bring up whenever I talk about matter and sculpture is this very historical model, which is called the helomorphic model, the helomorphism, which means to impose form into matter. So we have a pile of clay or a piece of stone or whatever sculptural material, and the artist is the one who comes and reveals the form in the matter or shapes the matter in the form that occurs or is being born in his imagination, in his abstractions. And I kind of like to look at the process of sculpture differently. I like to adopt a non-helomorphic model of sculpting, really looking at materials differently and paying attention to what they are, not taking them for granted, but more trying to be sensitive to their potential to change, to react, to speak back, to kind of also teach me some lessons. So that's why I end up speaking about this collaborative method of working with materials.
And it's also, I think, starting from this text that I've mentioned by Roger Calva, and actually that you've mentioned within previous shows, it was nice to find out that it was written in 85, and then just a year later, the book Fiasco by Stanislav Lem is published. And it was one of the starting points of imagery. You were talking to me about this process and how you're working with calcium and how this sort of inorganic matter has a sort of creativity for you. And passages from this Stanislav Lem book Fiasco came to mind while we were talking. And it linked so well with the idea of the macrocosmos and also the microcosmos. And this exhibition kind of encompasses both parts together, as we'll see later in our guided tour. And I think it was a very interesting moment to have this exhibition, also because many people have become obsessed with this sort of microcosmos of different viruses and particles that travel among us, because there is sort of new space race developing now with the possibility of traveling to Mars and exploring other planets in the solar system. So what I associated from Fiasco was this ideal of the possibility of interstellar travel and how it brings up the issue of infinite cosmic waste, and how we're obsessed with finding life on other planets, even remnants of life if possible, in a way of associating a sort of camaraderie of life in the universe together. And I really loved how you're speaking about inorganic matter, where it doesn't, yes, it has its own creativity and agency, but not by becoming somehow anthropomorphized. You, in your works, you let calcium be calcium and do what it does and react how it reacts. And it kind of turns down this idea of the cosmos that is only valuable as it hosts life, but rather brings a more holistic view of these particles and matter that is between us and that travels light years away to our planet and is part of this universe that we are imagining together. And that is not linked to any sort of genetic evolution or idea of hierarchy or idea of developing into something more. It just really is like that, as in sort of dead, unalive matter, actually. And so for these intents and purposes, I've took this quote that you've also shared on your Instagram. It's lovely because I had full passages of description in my mind, but then again, you refocus on a quote from the Fiasco that really got my wheels turning about our show again. And we start off the exhibition from this massive entrance, very dramatic entrance point that you built within the gallery, which looks a lot like this landscape. And it associates so nicely with the words "where nature slept, incarnating her magnificent grimness."
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And also because we have here at the right at the entrance, it's an Ipsos sculpture that is inspired by Ipsos crystals.
Yeah, like gypsum crystals.
Gypsum.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, just to go back a little bit to Lamb, because you mentioned him, and I remember when we first started talking about the show, about materiality, about active matter, and so on, you brought up the novel Fiasco by Lamb, which I haven't read back then. So, but we kind of discovered that we are both science fiction aficionados, and I was absolutely eager to get into that. And of course, I started to read this. You sent me some passages, but that was not enough. I needed to read the whole book, and I really found in his description of this alien world that this protagonist is discovering, Lem describes this matter as creative, as producing beautiful forms and formations without, as you said, without imitating anything, without being controlled or without a purpose or an evolutionary benefit, as you said. So on this not yet explored landscape, the raw materials, as he said, were the same chemical elements as on Earth, but he says that on Earth they had entered the servitude of biological evolution, and only in that context amazed us with their subtlety. Excuse me.
I'm taking a gulp of water with you. because yeah. It always happens during talks. It's always the case. I loved the part of the description in Fiasco that came to mind when we were talking about it was a scene in which one of the protagonists of the novel travels to this mineral landscape and finds this sort of calcium looking fragments and associates them with pieces of ribs and bones and seashells. And then at the end of the reverie kind of wakes up and thinks, okay, so that these were not made for me to see them, or he realizes that he can only understand things as he is familiar with them. So he always kind of gets back to this sort of associative thinking, this sort of like, only when they become familiar do they become sort of recognizable to him. And I think in this show, we've got shapes that are indeed quite, that kind of accessed a lot of the associative thinking of our visitors. Everybody thinking that they were part of like coral reefs or fossils, or kind of started talking about them as if they were animated. And it really kind of mirrored that sort of meeting that happened in the novel as well. But it was great because you were working on these way before that we started talking about Fiasco.
Yes, but as you brought it up, I absolutely loved this idea of a performative matter somehow, the way he described it, you know, the pure creativity of matter that is capable of generating all kinds of shapes and compositions, and that go often beyond the framework of human imagination. So it aligned beautifully with this the switch of from materiality as essence, this Aristotelian idea of materiality, to the materiality as process of formation, evolution without purpose, coming into being, flowing, happening. So, and this absolutely. I loved this because it was exactly what I'm interested in. So you were very to the point when you brought this up. So that was one of the departure point, actually, also when we started to build it, the whole exhibition. So we started to build it around this idea of an alien landscape that is dominated by the material, the main material, rather than by all kinds of human intentions and anthropomorphic formations.
So during this exhibition, we really did have a sort of growth happening. Maybe it would be interesting if you describe it, the process, kind of, because it was something that I really loved, also interacting with visitors in the gallery and explaining the process, that many of them thought that you've actually pressed these pieces of calcium onto the shapes, like you glued them afterwards.
Yeah, so the slide you had before, this entrance, the diorama, or this immersive landscape that was right at the entrance, was a sort of a model of geological formation, a replica of a landscape that was meant as a stage that situate the main material into its geological story. So the rockish field of it was supposed to provide an extended narrative somehow of gypsum, which is a very common material, this calcium-based mineral that is found in sedimentary rocks all over the world. So that was the beginning, and of course, these objects that grow in the landscape, they are actually going back to the idea of growing, which we again associate only with life and with things that are mostly organic. And I like to point out how this inorganicism that we perceive as still, as not moving or not really by itself, is actually is also has some forces that activate growing. And we also make the connection with some other things, because many of the materials or the objects there are actually the ones that you are showing now are plaster objects that were macerated together with other shells or bones or other calcium-based organic items in vinegar, and they kind of transfer this substances one onto the some dissolve, the calcium dissolves and it transfers, and it starts crystallizing. All this efflorescences that are on the surface of this object are actually this fossils of life that are now changing the shape of this mineral. So these bones and shells are a very good example of our interior or inorganicism. So we are also inorganic. We're not also organic. So I like to reveal this way in which we are not only animal and vegetable, but also mineral. So we are we come from a background of all kinds of substances, and we
also these ideas of minerals like calcium and potassium at a very biological level. They do not only construct our skeleton with which we move around, but ions of calcium and potassium also enable the exchanges that create electrical impulses and then are redone in speech and in seeing and how you at the end perceive the world. I think it was most shocking for when explaining to people also that these objects were not submerged in this acidic solution, vinegar in their case, but that they actually took through some sort of capillarity, I suspect, calcium from the solution, and then later on it emerges.
Yeah, it's the plaster is very porous. Also, gypsum, it's a very soft mineral, and it absorbs all this the vinegar, and then the calcium, the excess of calcium starts to is bursting out in a material formation on the surface of this objects.
Because the first picture was with the object still at the beginning. For example, here you've put them into different stages of growth.
Yeah.
And many of them at the opening exhibition were still quite grayish, still imbued with the vinegar. And then later on, you've got this beautiful colored sort of, growth and the fluorescence. I love the word influence, and how to say that it flowers onto them. That started changing colors, and all of a sudden, the exhibition that we started off before you left to Prague, that was so gray and white, now it's not so. Now it's quite colorful, actually.
Yeah, that's nice. Yes. It's also other substances that react and come into play, lots of iron or lots of pigments that were contained in shells, all kinds of shells that we melted. I remember you also brought some shells and sacrificed some shells from your collection. So yeah, everything is there somehow, but in a different form. And that's why maybe I can also explain why I entitled the whole show Temporal Parts. I mean, the title itself means that temporal parts actually are parts of an object that exists in time. So the whole exhibition is actually a temporal part of the items on display. Some of them they all change, and some of them will cease to exist, or some are different now already than they were at the beginning of the show due to all these chemical processes. And so and this also goes back to how I used to think about the material, because we think of materials and objects as spatial parts, as three-dimensional items. But my thinking and understanding is that all matter is four-dimensional. So this dimension of time is also one of the dimensions that matter is subject to. So I imagine the matter as a flow, and what I do is I'm trying to follow this flow and like discover or unveil all these things. And also the title of individual works, like for instance this one, The Coinciding Objects. This is also referring to the situation between change and permanence. What this coinciding objects, or even continuing objects, or all this.
I thought about the title coinciding objects, and I didn't get to tell you, but I think it's interesting to have inorganic matter, which has its own time, a sort of deep time that creates sediments and the sort of like archaeological construct, and then to coincide in the same space with us. So the title also kind of relates again to a sort of anthropomorphism, but without placing it in the center of things, but rather into the connection with the object.
But that's one of the interpretation. But also how I understand or think about this, the coinciding objects, what it is, it's like we are facing this paradox of things maintaining their identity while undergoing transformation. So we have the same objects here, but they look differently than they looked at the beginning. And so this oddity of moving while staying still, of growing or slightly changing shape while being the same object, is what was interesting for me. So that's the fascination by this discordance of this coinciding objects. They are the same but different.
And then at the same time, as we walk into the gallery towards the room in the left, we find these two new installations. The one on the left is called indeed continuing objects, these sort of droplets that are falling to the floor, and a very interesting installation titled Chaos Uniformly Waste. And I thought that we could first focus on this Chaos Uniformly Waste, which is a very poetic title indeed. And the way that they really look animated on those legs, although they haven't gone through the same process. Their making is quite different from the objects that we've just seen at the entrance.
Well, this you're right that it's a poetic title, because it's a line actually from Ovid's Metamorphoses, this book of transformations, which is actually a chronological narrative recounting the creation of the world and all kinds of historical events. So again, time is a great component in this, and I'm also very trying to pay attention to this dimension when I think and work with matter. And
I think it was great because I remembered the lines. We made the titles you made the titles for the works after a very detailed installation in which you kept changing places of objects and trying to see the relationships between them. And I've looked up this passage that actually takes from Ovid's Metamorphoses that deals with the making of the world. This idea that before the ocean and the earth appeared, before the skies had overspread them all, the face of nature in a vast expanse was not but chaos uniformly waste.
Yes, exactly. That's where I took the beautiful title, the beautiful combination of words. But I liked how there's a variety of transformation that take place in this in his writing, from human to inanimate object, from animal to fungus, from he always kind of like has this. I think he's very contemporary in some sense. Like we have to bring him back. I like to bring back all this atomists and Ovid and these are great actual ideas that we need to revive and revisit. And see them through the light of our times. So yeah, I can tell how I did this object, because I think this is important. Yeah. This although you said they look very animatic and maybe somehow organic or anthropomorphic, they're actually very abstract. I poured, but I inversed the process of working with plaster powder. So usually we make a mixture or soft mixture of this plaster and water, and then we pour it into all kinds of shapes, because the plaster is very, it copies, and it is very indexical. It's even used in as an imprint of anything. You can really take the imprint of anything. But I took water and I put it in a pile of dust, plaster dust, and I let the water interact, and the powder solidified the way it wanted. Again, like various forces like gravity or I don't even know what exactly.
Just how the fluid works within the plaster dust.
Yes. So they are actually solidification of this material under all kinds of conditions. So I only saw these shapes after I took them. I had no idea what's going on inside. So it was an invisible process, a very curious process for me to just take out some shapes from this pile of plaster and to see this formations, this almost geological formations.
They have a very powerful presence in the gallery, because they do seem to be forming a sort of collective together when they're put together like this. Or if you see them like this at the entrance, they also form a sort of fragmented topography that you kind of see the like forms of geological formations on top of them. And knowing the process of how they were shaped up, it's interesting, because this is also the volume that the water occupied within the given space, each time differently. So it's kind of like a small implosion every time that they're made. And then they're sent forth in this little herd in the gallery.
Yeah. Well, the herd is also this emphasis of this process, because I just did it repeatedly, and this is also selection, but I just kept doing it to see like what else this material can show me, can reveal, and can bring up. And I start with the assumption that objects, any kind of objects, are essentially meaningless in and of themselves. So it is us or the society that attaches meaning to them. So I'm interested in this incredible ability that humans have to give meanings to materials. And this is again, like, I remember when we were installing the pieces, like we all had different names for this bird. Some of them, sometimes they were clouds, sometimes they were sheep, sometimes. So this pareidolia, this ability of or characteristic of the human mind to assign some known meanings to any kind of abstractions, like we can't escape that. And this is again what Lem was talking about, like when he described the experience of this protagonist, that he came there and he started to see things that he was used to. We can't escape meanings. So I like to play with that, play in this realm of liberation from meaning, and in the way Lem describes nature, that when it's constrained by neither by life or the death or anything, it can achieve liberation, or it can display wastefulness or useless creativity without goal, without need, without meaning. And this is exactly this zone, this crepuscular zone between meaning and non-meaning.
And I thought that's kind of also freeing of the material, you know, that they can live through a supernova or be absorbed in a black hole, but they're very immutable in that way and very just for themselves. And then it's what we make with them that. So I liked also this kind of dialogue that you stand between you collaborating with the material, and then there's the conversation that happens between the object and the visitor, or whatever that fills their shapes into their minds.
Yeah, exactly.
And through a very specifically minimalist method. I mean, even by reading the description of the object, it's just plaster and the legs made of wood. And they meet in the same room with these, again, calciferous objects, continuous objects that are made in a way subjected to the gravity. And I didn't get to tell you this, but I found them, as much as I kind of walked around the exhibition, they're the most constrained objects that you've made, I think. In a way, you left them free in these soft molds that you made, but they're always pointing to the center of the earth, always under the influence of gravity. And even though they're fragile into the space, they drop nicely. They're always going to point this shortest distance between their origin and the center of the earth.
Yeah, that's right. They are actually all about gravity. This is like, you know, it's maybe one of the most powerful forces that is contributing to this, to all the creative processes, you know, that, but here is the most visible. You're right that it's visually rendered clearly, and it's also this feeling of dripping and everything kind of like is.
And also because you have this sort of relative thinking between the microscopic and the macroscopic, and we imagine the center of the earth, but we're not really at the equator, so it's more like, if you get out of the system of reference, it's more like an oblique fall towards the floor. So that's really enjoyable to kind of think about.
Yes, I agree with you, Cristina, on this.
It's not fun when we agree.
Not fun, so we can try to
also,
disagree.
You create this sort of atmosphere. And I remember when you came up with the idea of it, and I thought, yeah, let's make this gallery a spaceship. But it's not quite like that. It actually, this sort of materials thrown out of all the windows of the gallery during the daytime, it threw a wonderful sort of light spectrum that was also sometimes very subtle. You could just sense that the natural light had an extra purple to it within the exhibition show. And it also kind of made the space seem a bit more alien, although not very ostentative in a way.
Yeah, well, I think we also, or I was also thinking of, or was inspired by again by Lem. Lem is all over the place there, because he's when he's depicting this world. This new world, he describes it as bathed in this iridescent fluff, and I was trying to visualize that, like as we always do when we read something, like, you know, the fantasy is like, you know, absolutely full engine there, and I wanted to create the atmosphere somehow. So this, by using this foil, I wanted to create this milieu which has the potential to project the viewer into a new, sort of different world that is a little bit different than the gallery space that we knew it, or people know it from before, but also different from the outside world. So that's why I opted for this element. And I use it on the windows, also in this in this manner. I didn't want to stretch it fully. I kind of like tried it, and I saw the foil starts to make all this foldings and didn't want to be stretched. I said, okay, that's something. Like let's work with you the way you want to. So it was kind of like, again, trying to listen to this material and to let it have a word to say in the whole presentation. So
interesting to see how it changed. This is, for example, one of the photographs that we took in this space during nighttime. It was very opaque, but during the day, when it had the source of light behind it, it kind of filled the gallery with this sort of iridescent light. And this is also a good photo to show the passage. So in the left room, we had the two installations, and then crossing to the right room, we encounter something that's different in the way that is presented, but it contains all the shapes and then some that are showed within the gallery. And that installation is this archive of temporal parts, which I always thought it's an interesting way of thinking about it, because the archive already throws kind of this institutional character to it. So
yeah, well, I see it as I wanted to gather or to prepare a display for this forms created by me and the matter, or the matter and me. So it's an archive of forms rather, and I call these forms material expressions. So it's not, they are conceived without being conceptual. They emerged from a correspondent approach to plaster. So you can see there are different ways of being in dialogue with this material. Co-producing, co-generating, collaborating. So you're pouring plaster into only soft forms. I never use the hard solid, so I never anticipated exactly what it will come out. Just approximating, like maybe this, maybe that, and or I poured plaster on even surfaces and let everything join the creative process, so I always think like that creativity emerges from within an ongoing improvisational process between this me and the artists or the authors and the materials, and also other elements like tools and physical environmental conditions of the environment. So everything is somehow there. I wanted to capture it in a collection of tryouts, of outcomes of this tryouts that would reveal or portray all the processes that I used in making this objects.
Because we have this again, it becomes very clear how soft the molds that you used were and how they generated different shapes. So there's something between the artistic intention and the way that the matter collaborates with you, because we see some of the pieces. Again, this associative thinking makes me think about parts of brain structures.
Or, yes.
Again, yeah.
Yeah, this is funny, like the brain, because I think, or I try to how I try to think of is this. Anti-conceptual way of of making these things. I think we all suffer of something called chronic fatigue syndrome, this conceptual art fatigued by its own chronic theorizing. So I'm trying to go somehow to avoid this, falling into this, pattern. And I think in sculpture, you can allow yourself to reverse the order, first to do something and then to reflect on what happened. And this is what I try to do, like to see sculpture as an opportunity to get deeper and gain understanding to a maybe sometimes chaotic or random experimental process, and then look at it and learn from it. This is process maybe determined more by doing than by thinking. So the brains, I don't know what they do there, but this is again this associative thinking, or this imposition of meaning or something onto something that we see there by association.
And I always loved how you write about them. And I remember that you once sent me like a flow of thought text about the show. And the one thing that really, really stuck out to me was this, paraphrasing, this cool logic and visual reduction amid fictional self-contradictions.
Mm-hmm.
And this fictional self-contradictions, I think, applies to this work a lot. Because on the one hand, you have this sort of archive structure, which is set and shows you on one part unaffected objects, and then objects that have underwent the transformation with the vinegar and calcium absorption. Some of the objects fall off from the structure, so it also felt like a tongue-in-cheek idea about this theorizing and how these objects might self-archive them, or how we might encounter them somewhere, put in this obsession of making them in boxes and finding definitions of processes and ideas that they transmit, while in the same time making a very nice run through these all instantiations of matter throughout the show. Because we have here to the right also a piece of the plaster sculpture that we encounter at the entrance, a piece of the droplets continuing objects here, going some sort of molecular mitosis, because it's not quite straight, it doesn't quite fall. So yes, no, the archive was an installation that I loved, especially on the background of this magic eye wallpaper that also from the entrance kind of captures your eye and draws you in, this very abstract image. How long have you been working with this idea of magic eye stereograms?
Yeah, well, I like this idea of autostereograms. This is how they're officially called, these images. This magic eye is a popular name, but probably most people know them better by this name, by magic eye. But I like it because it is an image within an image. So I like this idea of this double image, that it's so it consists of this image that we all see right away, this two-dimensional image, but it also allows the viewer to perceive a camouflaged object in depth, in three-dimensionality behind. It's a hidden volume which is invisible in a direct inspection, but if you concentrate, or concentrate, I don't know if this is the right word, but if you insist, then another image emerges from the background pattern. So
I still can't see it on screen, but I see it very well now in space. I know that it frustrated some visitors, and myself included. I always gave myself, because you worked at that point a lot with Adrian, my significant other, that saw them immediately.
Yeah, I was lucky to have him. I was lucky to have him as a tester. I was testing the images I generated with him on him. To see if everybody sees the thing I see. So that was great to have somebody.
So not only a 3D shape emerges, basically expanding the space
exactly
behind it.
That was also the idea, to kind of like enlarge virtually, or expand the space of the gallery into another dimension, into something that is beyond maybe this physical world, and takes us into some other worlds or distant worlds. Autostereograms, as such, they work like gateways to another plane of perception, to another space. So they're apertures to a new dimension embedded in something that is very flat. It's just a sheet of wallpaper.
Because because your eye is biologically shaped and it's sort of instructed from birth to just focus directly on the image that you're looking at. And here, in order to see the encoded image, you have to try to look behind the image or in front of it and focus on this invisible, improbable space rather than the image itself.
Yes, exactly. I like it. It's called Cyclopian Vision. It's this,
Yeah.
this is, I think this is something that explains very well what you have to actually do. You have to merge both your eyes into one point, but not on the surface, but behind or in front, as you mentioned. So
so during this presentation, for all the frustrated visitors that that visited us, and also myself at one point, that I really wanted to see what you're showing. This is the encoded image that actually shows up as a volumetric shape.
Yes, exactly. This is actually a depth map of Cassiopeia A. It's a remnant of a supernova explosion that is the most I wanted to say palpable, but it's not palpable. It can be observed from our planet, from the Earth, and this image, or the model of this explosion, the remnants, of course it's changing all the time, because all this it's expanding, all this materials it's are kind of moving in a slow pace, and it's very interesting because the chemical elements that are in this explosion reminiscence are kind of like sticking together, so it's chemically opinionated, all this. So that's why when NASA is making a rendering of the maybe you have an image with the rendering of this Cassiopeia. So this is not how it looked. It's a false colored image of the explosion, but you can see that the same elements kind of stick. So each element has a different color, and we can see how, interestingly, it kind of like, this matter again, like, has some molecular kinship or affinity towards each other, and it holds together, and it creates this, if you can decipher it, it creates this beautiful pattern. So all these observations made by NASA, but with this famous telescopes that they have, led to this 3D model rendering of this explosion, which
then it's encoded into this image.
Yes, it's encoded. It's a depth map. I rendered a depth map out of that, and you can see this explosion hidden by this pattern, by this abstract pattern, which is actually a microscopic image of gypsum. So it goes back to where all the substances come, and we know this calcium is an alien substance. It was not formed on Earth. It came when our planet formed from other probably galaxies. So so this is how all somehow comes together, and also goes deep, far away, very deep, into an unknown world. Yeah.
Well, thank you for bringing this cosmic explosion to us. Within the show, we also wanted to reunite this sort of cosmic and microscopic view on elements and unalive matter. So we also showed a video that you've created the year prior to the exhibition that has this Odyssey-like title, "Tell Me Dust About Your Complicated Matter." And it's really a story about dust in between us in our lives, also part of this cosmic dust and particles that travel through the universe. I only wanted to mention it because it really links to our conversation, and for a visitor that comes within the gallery, I thought that this video really kind of centers around the topics that we've discussed as well. I'm actually We're nearing the end. I think this is the time that we said that we're going to give to this discussion, and also let questions go on Facebook. But I look at Ingrid, and maybe the questions will arise later on, maybe also in person. Where can we see your next project? What's happening in the next few months?
It's the next show is going to be in Kunsthalle Bratislava very soon. It's opening on the 3rd of March, and it's collaborative project with Alexandra Weid. I've been collaborating with her previously. She's a Slovene photographer, also based in Prague, and we are going to create again an immersive environment which will be created with the use of photographic chemicals. So we're back to chemistry. I know you love chemistry, and I love you love chemistry. Always bring this information.